Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. Now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 216 of the Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. Today's guest is someone who embodies the power of resilience, belonging, and transformation. Key themes not just in his life, but in the work we do here at the Criminologist podcast and within our TIDES Supervision Model. Gaelin Elmore's story is one of overcoming adversity, embracing the power of belonging, and finding his identity through connection and support. Concepts that align with the TIDES pillars of change. Born into a struggling household as the youngest of 5, Gaelin spent over a decade in the foster care system, enduring physical, mental, and emotional abuse. At many points in his life, the odds were stacked against him. His trajectory could have followed a path of continued hardship, but as we explore in today's conversation, his story took a turn towards something much more hopeful. In his sophomore year of high school, when his father was arrested, Gaelin faced a life-changing decision: return to foster care or disappear into the streets. It was then that his high school football coach and family stepped in, offering him something he hadn't fully experienced before: a genuine sense of belonging. This feeling of belonging transformed his life in ways that go far beyond his athletic accomplishments, which include a college football career at the University of Minnesota and a brief stint in the National Football League. Gaelin's journey highlights the themes we often discuss through the TIDES Supervision Model, especially the role of social support, resiliency, and identity transformation. As we know, the TIDES pillars of change center on self-regulation, identity, resiliency, and social support. Elements that are essential not just for high-risk clients, but for anyone looking to transform their lives. Gaelin's story of leaving professional sports to dedicate himself to working with youth, helping them navigate their own adversities, is a perfect example of how personal change and transformation can inspire broader social impacts. His advocacy for the power of belonging and his focus on closing the, quote, belonging gap, unquote, for youth is a reflection of the work we strive for with TIDES, supporting individual transformation and creating sustainable, positive change for those we serve. It is a privilege to have Gaelin on today's episode, where we will not only explore his remarkable journey, but also discuss the larger concepts of belonging, resilience, and identity that are at the heart of his work. Now, please enjoy my conversation with Gaelin Elmore, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, welcome to the show, Gaelin. We are finally reconnecting after several years, rather. I know you and I met when you were giving a keynote address for, I believe it was a MACAC Corrections Conference here in Minnesota. And as the listeners are about to find out, your message really resonated with that group of correctional practitioners. And like I said, I want to circle back to how your expertise and work can be infused, I guess, into the justice system. But why don't we kick things off, Gaelin? Go ahead, introduce yourself to the audience. Give us your brief bio of what brought us here together, and then we'll start chopping it up on some of these amazing topics that we're going to cover.
Yeah, so my name is Gaelin Elmore. I am a Minnesota resident, so I'm not coming from all the various places that Joe digs people up. I'm Minnesota. That's home. And yeah, so I've experienced a lot of things in my childhood and my upbringing that really changed my development and my trajectory and the lens at which I see the world through. A lot of that being foster care, abuse, homelessness, neglect, having like incarceration being a massive thing throughout both sides of my family history, mental health. We're talking substance addiction and chemical dependency. Like all those things have greatly shaped my lens of my world. And I was just someone that was able to, in the words of other people, overcome it all or defy the odds and become who I am. In all reality, it wasn't that simple. And if anything, it was the simple part about my journey in my life was that I am not here on my own doing, that I am here because I got adequate, successful, and good support. And so that's where the belonging stuff comes in. The work that I'm doing now is as a speaker, trainer, and consultant, really just empowering people to create environments of belonging where everyone can thrive and really helping people get out of this space of survival and into a space of thriving. And that happens by way of belonging. So that's my work. That's what connected us all those years ago now. And why we're having this conversation today.
I'd really like to unpack that theme of belonging, which we mentioned we met in a professional correctional context where you were speaking to probation, parole, corrections officials. And I see that as something that's sort of missing from our cocktail of rehabilitation, if you will.
Yeah.
Now, we will, to our credit, we do talk about social support. And you mentioned how you almost leverage that support into belonging, but maybe get into some of the nuances of that. Again, Gaelin, any of my listeners who know sort of corrections 101, probation 101, largely our risk need responsivity model is based on social learning theory. But I think we're doing such I don't want to say a basic job of that, but an oversimplified job of that, where we simply think, well, stop hanging around with your hood rat friends that you met while you were in prison. And that's typically how it ends. Well, best case, it's, okay, stop hanging out with those people, but we don't tell the client how to fill that void with pro-social support. But even if the practitioner does, again, I don't think that they're getting the benefit that you're saying, where you're connecting the dots between support and belonging. And belonging is really the secret sauce. So maybe talk about some of how your experiences sort of tease that out.
Yeah, so I think it's important for all of us to understand that belonging, connection, like human connection, can be categorized on the list of human needs in the same way that food and water is, right? And so we have to start there, because if you would tell someone, hey, it's either get food in a positive way or don't eat at all, then that would be an incorrect and really unjust way of looking at people and their immediate physical needs to thrive and show up in a space. The reality is those aren't the only options. The only, in most people's situations, starving or not having a home or not having access to my basic human needs, not having access to it isn't an option. It's either I have a positive outlet to obtaining it or I have a negative one. And we can't hold people, wag our fingers at people and tell them to do better when we don't give better. And so I was just fortunate enough that I had people in my life, whether they really knew it or not, that were giving me really only positive options in the midst of the trauma and chaos that I was navigating. It wasn't like, hey, Gaelin, you can make a choice here. You can go one way or the other. Go figure it out. Because I was if it was up to me, I would have went the negative route. But it wasn't left to me. People gave me options and they showed me what could be the most impactful way forward. And so it's really, this whole conversation about belonging starts with our own understanding about what people need. You can't be frustrated with someone for getting their needs met in ways that we haven't given them options, right? And that's just so true for a lot of the children that are being served by the professionals that I'm partnering with, but that's also true for the adults we might find in the justice system who have went their entire childhood and developmental years without it as well. So that's really that is the I guess the genesis or the foundation of this conversation around belonging that I think not a lot of people get, unfortunately.
I love how you frame that as individuals getting their needs met. I don't want to go too far down a criminology rabbit hole, but for the listeners who are aware of Tony Ward and the Good Lives model, he sort of takes that approach where historically in corrections under the risk need responsivity framework, a lot of that critique is it's very deficit driven. And the Good Lives model flips it around and says, we're all seeking basic needs in life, whether it's happiness in our vocation, happiness in our relationships. And to your point, he said, oftentimes individuals get those needs met via pathways that are not conventional, aka criminal. And he's got a lot of great work done. And again, I know I'm going on a tangent here, but for example, when he talks about sex offenders, he says, well, they're meeting a basic need, but they're doing it through an antisocial way. And we define that as criminal. But to really get a handle on that, they view it through, well, they're just getting their needs met in a certain way. And I love how you put the belonging that way too. I know you talked a lot about, and you just mentioned the juvenile justice, but you've talked about youth waking up in what you refer to as survival mode, where they're unable to even conceptualize what belonging might mean for them.
Yeah.
How can adults, communities, probation and parole officers sort of begin to bridge that gap for not just young people, but all justice involved people that we're serving?
So I think the best way we can bridge that gap again is starting with self. How and what environment am I not at my best, most thoughtful, creative, insightful version of myself? Well, it's when I'm stressed out. It's when when stuff is hitting the fan for me in my life, and then maybe we don't even make the best decisions possible. Maybe as a professional, you've made poor decisions because tensions have been so high, and you've made a decision that has felt like the right thing in the moment, but really when you are out of it and you can look back and you're like, oh, I didn't have the full grasp of the weight of that encounter or the decision I just made. We all find ourselves in survival modes. It just depends on the situation. This is exactly why you had people when COVID started to happen in 2020, you had people in grocery stores fighting over toilet paper. Yep. In a normal context, you're not going to have people did you hear an article or read something lately that people are fighting over toilet paper in the grocery store? No, it happened because people were thrust into survival mode. And so again, it's so much about decriminalizing human needs, or seeing people for where they're at, is first seeing us oh, could I find myself there? And so much about understanding neuroscience around belonging and relationship is helping us differentiate between someone that we look at as a problem or a criminal or a deviant or something, and then look at ourselves in the mirror and say, hey, if these 5 things maybe happen or go differently in my own development, then maybe I see the world through similar lenses to them. There's not that much that separates us from each other. It's just how have our needs been met over time, and how has that changed the lens through which we see the world. And again, I was just fortunate enough that in the midst of me really falling to the habits and the circumstance of my trauma, having people meet my needs, meet me where I'm at, and elevate me so that I didn't have to continue to be in that. I'm no better than my parents who fell victim to criminal behavior and addiction and mental health and, like, again, losing their children to the system. I'm no better. I'm not like a better person. I've just gotten better support. And so yeah, this whole like young people waking up in survival is like, one, can I see myself in situations where I'm in survival mode? That's like the biggest first step. And then two, it's understanding, like, if they are in survival mode, then the biggest question they are asking right now is whether they are safe. They are not asking, oh, is this like the best decision for my future? They're not asking, like, is this going to lose like privileges for me 3 weeks down the road? No, it's a matter of safety right now. And so those two things are, I really just try to reiterate with people. First, put yourself in their shoes. We've all find ourselves in situations where we might say something to a loved one that we didn't mean. And it's like, well, I want to be forgiven for that after the fact because I didn't mean it. I don't know what I was thinking. But the reality is, you just weren't in your logical thinking brain when you made that decision. So how can we apply those similar things? And yes, they are bigger, higher stakes scenarios and situations in which people get incarcerated for. Absolutely. So we're not removing responsibility for decisions and how they impact other people. However, it's the empathy, it's the compassion, it's the belonging that we're extending to people in the midst of the bad decisions that they're making.
Yeah, I've learned that perspective taking goes so far, Gaelin, and everything that at least I'm trying to accomplish in this space. And I also love when you're speaking, there's this theme of a parallel process is occurring here.
Yes.
You mentioned neuroscience earlier, but in my training, whether it's motivational interviewing, risk assessment, cognitive behavioral interventions, trauma desistance, it doesn't matter. Whenever I can say something or define a concept in a way that is relatable to the practitioner, in other words, that they can also gain that perspective, then that's when the magic happens. And whether it's, I mean, any motivational interviewing trainer rather out there has probably said to their trainees a million times, okay, any of you who have kids, you're going to relate to this. Or, whenever I can use, my colleagues tease me that I'm sort of the king of metaphors or the king of analogies when I train, but it works because you see the light bulbs going off because it's the perspective taking that you just talked about. And if it's breaking it down into, I don't know, maybe I'll talk about how, watching a YouTube video to learn how to change the battery on your riding lawnmower rather. Yeah, that's an example of social learning theory. It's like, oh, now I get it. But the more we take away that us versus them, which as regular listeners to the podcast know, that's my sign off. There's no them, there's only us. The better outcomes we're going to get.
Just think about all of the really sad historical events in like our world's history, right? The successful meaning like they were effectively carried out. Harmful events in the history of our world were when the first step to it was when people successfully othered other people, right? It's this creating of us and them that has been really this launching point for a lot of harm that has been done and for a long time went unchecked. I'm not in a space where I will ever find myself comfortable with othering people, even people and we're in political election season, right? So like even in the midst of where it's just total like nonsense being spewed from everywhere, I still cannot other people because then we stop seeing them for who they are. And again, like when you create an us and them, you can convince yourself that my survival is now dependent on not being connected to them. And that is only that is us making decisions in our survival mode at the expense of other people finding themselves in theirs. And I just that's something I just adamantly disagree with in any capacity.
You mentioned othering other individuals, and I've got a colleague who he and I talk about sort of those isms. We have sexism, we have racism, we have ageism, but he talks about otherism. And once you become aware of that, and if there are any folks in correctional leadership listening, pick up on some of that water cooler talk about your staff members and the otherism. Sure. When you start hearing, Gail, in terms like, well, those guys or those people, but it's in the context of the people you're serving. I mean, again, they're othering. They're keeping at a distance. Yeah. They're not like us. Those are those monsters that commit crimes or whatnot. Yeah. Otherism is huge in corrections, I would contend. And that awareness can go a long way.
Yeah. And it leads to confirmation bias, right? So if I see you as someone who is inherently evil, inherently opportunistic, and will victimize other people, then everything you do is going to be seen through the lens of that. You could be making the most honest, loving gesture of giving someone a meal or your food off your plate, and it will be seen as, oh, they're trying to poison them. Oh, they're trying, you know what I mean? So it's just like it creates this vacuum where just things can go unchecked, and it just, in any other context, it wouldn't make sense. But in that othering, it definitely does.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I wanted to talk to you about your experience with what we refer to as generational trauma and what your experience was like with that and how it relates to belonging. I see this in the justice system. It's tragic, but I mean, I grew up in a smaller suburb here of St. Paul, but a lot of folks experience or are aware of that cliche where the sixth grade teacher on the first day of class, oh, Joy, I remember your dad was sat in that row 30 years ago, grandfather, uncle, whatever. Sadly, we see this in larger corrections agencies where we get these, for lack of a better term, crime families that are just generational. For the longest time, when I was trying to sort of crack that nut, I was thinking, well, this is really social learning theory on steroids. I mean, if you grow up in a home where dad's incarcerated, mom's on supervision, brothers and sisters all have probation officers, that's sort of normalized. And again, I used to hang my head on social learning theory, but now talk about, again, how you think that these experiences of belonging or lack thereof kind of intersect with that concept of generational trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. So belonging is it is a combination of our physical and relational needs being met with consistency and in a positive manner. Now, again, if we don't have positive outlets, we will lean on negative outlets. But here's the thing. I cannot overcome by myself alone the environment that I'm a part of, right? So someone who has never had their physical and relational needs met in a positive way that has given them the space and room to develop in a healthy, life-giving sort of way, they're not going to have the capacity to do that for me. So you are only able in a lot of ways to you can only access what your primary caregivers can give to you. And out beyond primary caregivers, we're then talking about community members, and we're talking about like the village, right? The teachers, the coaches, the community members. But if we're talking about the othering of my family in and of itself, then we're not getting that kind of support. We're not getting that, oh, that teacher might see, well, Gaelin, because you're George's boy, I'm not going to give you the help that other students, your peers, might get because I know you're just one of those kind of kids, right? And so generational trauma is really just extensive, unrelenting, toxic stress that's is carried, like passed down biologically, is passed down because there are genetics that are involved in this that are passed down, but also relationally passed down, right? Because the number one source of belonging for every human, every person, the richest source of belonging is our biological parents. That is a like, there are literal chemicals that are communicating to an infant that they belong with those people. But with how you get parented, it changes what your body needs. And our need to belong with them doesn't change, but what we need to do in order to feel as though we belong with them might change. So that's why you might have someone engage in criminal activity and they don't want to. They may not even want to, but it's like, this is what my family does. This is what I like. I've always been taught, this is, you never turn your back on family. Like, this is what we do. This is who I am. So you start to fall into those cycles. But belonging is a genuine, authentic, positive, life-giving access to belonging unlocks something in our brain that just can start to counteract all of those negative experiences. And so that's where my role of like working with community members of like caseworkers, child welfare professionals, attorneys, CASA, GAL, educators, coaches, like all of these people, like, yeah, we might be able to get to the family, but if we never get through to the adult, because ultimately there's a certain like, it's really hard to get through to a certain age person that is unwilling and unresponsive to change. I'm not saying give up on them, but if we're only looking to that parent to change the course for this young person, then we're not doing enough. We're washing our hands of a situation that we shouldn't have. And so that's why my work is geared around the people who can support that young person so that the cycle can be circumvented. So it doesn't have to be a destiny for those young people.
You mentioned your work, but I want to back up because when you talked about the role of parents, my nerd brain went right to attachment theory. But that's why I want to mention some of your work here. I know your experience as a board member for the Association for Training on Trauma and Attachment in Children has, I think, really crystallized some of that work that you're doing with trauma and attachment and playing with that sense of belonging. I know in that context, it's with foster youth, but maybe talk about, again, foster youth and those experience adversity, a little bit more about that connection there.
Yeah. So early on in development, attachment is vital, but really belonging is the outcome of attachment, right? So like attachment for an infant with their primary like biological family, like that attachment that takes place is a consistent source of belonging. It is a consistent reassurance. Whereas as you get older, and let's say we're not talking about like biological relationships, the attachment that happens for young people then is really an outcome of belonging. So they're different in the way of there's just biological access that is available for a young child, and all they know is attachment and belonging. That's the only thing that an infant understands. It's the thing that allows them to thrive in those early days. But as we get older, attachment can't, with this new figure in my life, can't really take place until I'm experiencing belonging on a consistent level with them. So it plays a tremendous role, but there's a lot of, even in those spaces, Joe, when we're talking about foster care adoption, like residential treatment or residential care facilities for kids, so much of it is only focused on safety, on the physical needs and not the relational needs. And so people assume like, well, because I'm communicating to you that I'm safe, then that should mean that you feel like you belong. And it's not that it's the wrong answer. It's just an incomplete answer. You haven't finished the question. You haven't really completed the thought. It's safety along with connection that leads to belonging. It is both. So not only am I meeting your physical needs, making sure you have a safe roof over your head and food, water, shelter, I'm also making sure you feel as though you are important here, that you're connected in a way that you add value to this space that no one else can add. You have unique things to provide here. Those things allow us to feel as though we belong, which then allows us to focus on our development and potential and esteem. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in the middle, you have love and belonging. I tell people all the time, love and belonging, according to the hierarchy of needs, is the bridge from all of our physical needs to all of our dreams and aspirations. So everything someone wants to be is the bridge to get there is love and belonging. And so that's where my personal role with Attach is again giving another perspective as we try to be a leader in training, as we try to support families and caregivers and professionals, therapeutic professionals, but also other direct support type of professionals, trying to make sure that we're having all perspectives in that, but also like not missing the forest for the trees, and really in this effort to meet like so that people can experience attachment, there has to be belonging that is being prioritized, that is taking place along the way.
Ever since I got you booked on the show, Gaelin, I was excited to talk to you and pick your brain about the TIDES Supervision Model that my colleague, who I believe you know, Nicole Kimberly Staley, and I developed. And the reason I'm excited is because even during this interview, the themes that we've hopefully baked into the cake with our TIDES model keep coming up in your responses and in sort of your worldview. So just to remind the listeners and to remind you maybe, Gaelin, I'll just sort of give you that model in broad strokes, and you could just jump in and either concur or give feedback. But essentially, we built this model on three theoretical constructs around trauma-informed care, desistance from crime, and neuroscience. And from that sort of three-legged theoretical stool, we came up with what we refer to as the 4 pillars of change that we've built into the model. Those of self-regulation, identity, resiliency, and social support. So when I think of those 4 pillars, I'm hearing you talk about resilience. And when you talk about belonging, of course, I'm connecting the dots back to social support because that's the ultimate goal. Yeah. I would contend, and what we love about the model is there's a certain synergy between the 4 pillars that when you address one, you address several. For example, when you address someone's belonging or you build their social support, you're going to have an impact on their identity. Just as when you address someone's self-regulation, you're going to have an impact on their resiliency. But I would love to get your sort of semi-on-the-spot critique, feedback on the model, and maybe even not endorse, but ratify a lot of the concepts that we brought together here. Yeah.
I think belonging and trauma-informed, like a trauma-informed approach, are very synergistic. The one hiccup that I've found with trauma-informed care, trauma-informed model, trauma-informed teaching, all of the trauma informs, is that it still has become a tool that was very positive and well-intentioned that has led to othering. It is very much led to, well, here's our students that need a trauma-informed approach, and here are students that need our like a ordinary normal support. And the reality is, like, belonging to me is again, it removes the othering. What you need, Joe, to belong and what I need to belong, like, is still relatively the same. How we would go about obtaining that would be different. What someone might need to do for you to communicate to you safety and connection is going to be a little different from me, but it doesn't allow me to other someone else's needs because of the different experiences we have. We all need belonging. And if anything, there are just some who have gone extended periods without their belonging needs being met. And so how do we understand that is changing how they're showing up right now? But I love that identity is a big part of it. Obviously, social support is, and I'll get to that in a sec. But the identity piece is so important, and it's one of kind of the I don't know if he would accept the term founding fathers of this kind of belonging work, but his name, he's a psychologist. He works at Stanford, and his name is Greg Walton. And he says part of his work about belonging is, and he works primarily with school age young people. And primarily the work is helping those through the interventions separate the negative things they experience from their identity, right? So, like being able to separate the fact that, oh, I experience isolation, I experience disconnection, I get a lot of suspensions or detentions or things kicked out of class, like separating that from who I am and being able to see it for what it is, which is, hey, everybody has days, everybody messes up and makes mistakes. And seeing it as that is not a reflection of my own worth or value. It's just a part of life. And if I can stop attaching additional meaning and purpose and identity to these negative things, then in a way, I'm free of it, right? If I stop accepting, well, I do bad things or I make bad decisions because I'm a criminal, right? That is a much different perspective than I have committed crimes before in my life, right? Where I don't know about you, Joe. I speed every day that I get in the car. So I'm breaking laws. It's just I'm not breaking the same ones as them, right? And I don't connect it to my identity. I don't let this spiral happen of like, hey, I did this one thing. I got a ticket one time. Now I'm someone who gets tickets, right? It's because we're regulated enough that doesn't alter kind of how we process and understand things. And so the identity thing I think is massive. The regulation piece is, again, just being in a healthy headspace. It is having access to all of the controls. Like think about regulation as like I'm looking at my keyboard right now. Dysregulation is that I need to work, but I only have access to 7 of the keys on my keyboard. Right?
I love it.
How am I going to get any work done that's meaningful? Maybe I could, like, if I can access my mouse here or there, I could do some stuff, but the ultimate, I don't have access to my full capacity. Regulation is, hey, how do I make sure I have everything here that I need to make good decisions and to be productive and good? And so regulation is giving people access to everything they need. And so resiliency is and you probably would have heard me talk about this, Joe, when I did the keynote, but resiliency is a more necessary term for the support that people receive more than it is the individual going through hard stuff, right? So it's like, how do we make a resilient support for that inmate that is now getting released and going back into everyday society? How do we make sure that the support is resilient? Because we know there's going to be hiccups. We know there are going to be things, curveballs thrown, blow-ups that happen. That's a part of it. But how do we have supports in place that just because you experience one hiccup doesn't mean the bottom falls out? And so those two things, resilience and support, go hand in hand in my book. Like, I can only be resilient for so long. And I need people that are going to be resilient with and for me so that I can continue to like figure things out, adjust, learn, mature, heal as we move forward, rehabilitate, right? Because that's really what the goal of our justice system is rehabilitation. But it is a reflection of the support. And we need support. Everyone needs support. And the difference between the successful people in our world and the people who are struggling, maybe homeless on the street, I'm willing to bet the difference between every single one of those people is the support that they received, not how unresilient they might have been throughout their experiences. So yeah, I love it. I think you guys are, I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head for sure.
Just at the tail end there, when you were mentioning social support and sort of the ubiquitous nature of how that factors into so many of our endeavors. There's a gentleman that's been on the show a couple of times by the name of Brad Bogue. And one of the truth bombs that he dropped on me the first time he appeared on the show, and I'm paraphrasing right now, but he essentially said, Joe, in any psychosocial treatment, whether you're treating addictions, you're treating depression, paranoia, criminality, it doesn't matter. He said, regardless of the population, the biggest moderator for success is social support. That's the key ingredient. If you look at any off-the-shelf program treating any of those populations, the biggest variable of success is social support. People with good social support do better, and people without it don't. And you just eloquently summarized that, Gaelin.
There's research that talks about that impacts our physical health as well. There's a really sad but fascinating study where they followed patients dealing with and navigating HIV/AIDS in the early 2000s and really just tracked how many of them felt like they had compassionate, loving support as they were dealing with this disease and how many didn't. And the rate that those survived that had compassionate, caring, loving support compared to those that didn't was alarming.
Yep.
No different treatment, no different medical access, no change in any of that. The only variable that changed was the direct, caring, compassionate support that people received. And so that it changes how our body is resilient to disease. And this is why ACEs in a lot of ways changes life trajectory. It changes the quality and quantity of life that you will have because you lack so much of that necessary relational support. Not only people being unable to provide it, but also being unable to receive it, which is a big piece of it too.
Yeah. And again, I know we're just missing the boat on that in traditional correctional programming, because even if we look at that element, let's say of negative peers, it's more of the hammer than anything, right? No contact orders, stop hanging out with your gangster friends.
Yeah.
We don't fill that void at all. There's no social support programming. I mean, there is. I'm being a little bit flippant just to make my point, but yeah, we're really happy that we've made that a pillar of the TIDES program. Hey, Gaelin, I mentioned earlier that I'm the king of metaphors and analogies when training, and I want to publicly go on record and say I'm going to steal your keyboard analogy that you used earlier to describe regulation and being dysregulated. Indeed, in our TIDES model, we embraced neuroscience. We really leaned a lot into Dr. Bruce Perry's work, his neurosequential model, but we make it a point to go over mindfulness techniques and things of that nature, because we realize when a client's dysregulated and they cannot access their prefrontal cortex, none of your cognitive behavioral interventions or other sort of traditional correctional programming is really going to get any traction, because they're down in survival mode. They're sitting in the office saying, I saw my cousin here arrested last week. I'm looking over my shoulder for the sheriffs to pick me up. Or everybody says that you're the worst PO in the county. Or I'm just legitimately scared shitless. But when the probation officer is reading those terms and conditions of probation, or again, even if they fancy themselves a progressive evidence-based practice PO, and they're doing a social skill or a think-in report or walking through a cost benefits analysis, if their client is stuck down in the amygdala because they're dysregulated, you're talking to them like Charlie Brown's teacher in the Peanuts cartoons. So I'm going to use your keyboard analogy to say, folks, you got to get your clients regulated, because as you said, they can't access all the keys. Or as I say, they can't get to what we refer to as the penthouse of the brain, where all the magic happens. They can't get to the cortex.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why we have such high attrition rates in thinking for a change or these other sort of cognitive behavioral tools. And that's why.
And this is why love Dr. Bruce Perry's work. He is the root of a lot of the science, the evidence-based stuff around belonging, around attachment, around understanding the brain. All those things is so foundational for me. The keyboard thing is something I just thought about, and because the reality is, it's think about how frustrated you would be if you could only access 4 keys on your keyboard and you were expected to get the job done like that. I get mad when my Wi-Fi doesn't reload as fast as
Yeah.
I need it to. But what's the difference? We just can't again put ourselves in the shoes or the perspective of someone else who might find them selves in a dysregulated state. I tell people all the time, belonging is not has very little to do with the what of what you're doing and everything to do with how you are doing it. Right? It's not a initiative or an implementation. It is a cultural commitment to this is how we do what we do. You can have any evidence-based practice that you want, and I genuinely believe it will be successful if you are meeting the relational, physical and relational needs of those that you're serving. That's it. So it's way more about the how than anything else. And so I tell people all the time, I'm not coming in here to change what you do. I'm not coming in here. Like maybe there are some things that are directly against belonging and they need to go. But for the most part, it's more of a how. Like, yeah, have structure in place, have consequences, have all those things. I'm not trying to like live in a fluffy, idealized like world where none of these things make sense anymore. No, they do, but they still can be carried out in an effective way that is affirming the dignity of the people that we're serving. And that's really what it comes down to.
I've done some work and a lot of research around what folks typically refer to as sort of the Norwegian model, but it's really dynamic security, but it's relational. It's everything you're describing. So when folks talk about, again, the Norwegian prison system and the crazy results they get embracing quote unquote dynamic security, it's what you just said. It's just relation based. It's seeing somebody as Joe Arvidson and not prison ID 1234556, or again, the otherism we've been talking about. It's just relational. So much could be accomplished just by being relational and perspective taking and empathy. Gaelin, Leslie, your work touches on both individual empowerment, which we've been talking about, and community-wide change. I've been doing some work with some great folks down in North Carolina who are trying to really get behind that whole community-wide change. What advice would you give to communities that want to create an environment of belonging, whether it's for youth or justice-involved individuals or folks struggling with addiction or just in general? What might that look like coming from folks coming from those backgrounds, trauma, adversity, all of the above?
Yeah, I think first, my first part of that answer would be that belonging is an open invitation that people can freely accept and reject at their own will. Like just because you want to start doing something differently, maybe you want to implement belonging, or you want to implement the TIDES model, you want to do this new thing, doesn't mean that people have to be responsive to it. And just because people aren't responsive to it doesn't necessarily mean you should stop inviting. Like it is like, think about it. Like if we're talking about true belonging, Joe, belonging isn't a one-time invitation, take it or leave it, kind of a proposal. It's not, hey, I need you to be here at this time when I need you to be here. And that's the only way you can belong in this kind of relationship or context. It's here's an invitation. You can accept it and reject it whenever you want. So that means you can reject it right away and be like, nope, I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want this invitation you're offering. Like, I don't want to go grab coffee. I don't want to talk to you about my feelings. You could reject it. But then you're not holding that against me if I follow back in a couple weeks, months, like where life has kind of happened. Like you're still inviting it. And you're like, hey, Gaelin, like I still would love to do this thing with you or walk with you in this way. Like it's a consistent invitation that people can freely accept and reject without consequence. And this is one of the bigger concepts that I tell people, like people we have to understand. We have been conditioned in almost every facet of our like society to make connection a contingency for compliance. And so in almost every facet of our society, we have like bait on a fishing line, dangled connection over people's head to get them to do what we want them to do. And when they don't, we remove it. And that is one of the most harmful things we can do. So if you are an individual, if you're a community, if you are trying to do things a little bit differently, implement belonging, but trauma informed, some of this stuff that we've talked about on this call, you have to do away with manipulating people's connection to get what you want. We have to have a lens of, even if you don't check the boxes I need you to, doesn't mean I'm going to treat you like a piece of garbage as we respond. Like, I even think it's like probation is a clear situation where, hey, you got to check these boxes in order to get these things that you've been given, right? If you fail to abide by your guidelines, you're going to get reincarcerated. Now, it doesn't mean that belonging is like, well, I don't have those boxes for people to check anymore, right? That is a part of the system. I'm not here to reinvent how probation is done. That is not in my capacity. That's not in my vision. But what I am saying is, even when I come back to your office, Joe, and I didn't check those boxes, that your relational response isn't treat me like garbage. We've had all this time of us being close, and I've been doing what you wanted and checking the boxes, and we've been great. And then the one time I disappoint you, it's like you don't know me, or it's like you don't want to see me, right? Like, that is this relational manipulation that happens where belonging is like, no, you might fail. You're going to fail, actually. There's going to come a time where you're not going to hit the mark. Even still, I'm going to treat you with dignity. I'm going to treat you with belonging and invite you to experience connection amidst of this spiral that might happen as a consequence of your own decisions. And so much of it, just from school age, from early development, all of it is like teaching people that, hey, if you don't do what people need you to do, then you're not going to be connected to them. And that's just not how the human brain works. It's not a healthy way to be in a relationship. And it's definitely not a way to help those in our communities, those in the spaces that we're serving, kind of regulate, adjust, and heal from the things that they've gone through.
Yeah, it's so transactional, like you said.
Yeah.
Do this and you'll get that, even down to compliance or adherence with conditions. And it certainly doesn't foster what we now know through best practices is the requisite place of safety and security and trust for learning and coaching and change to take place. And if you think of a probation office, and I know I'm painting with a broad brush here, but historically, people don't view that as like, oh yeah, I can't wait to go see my PO to get an overdose of the warm and fuzzies, right? It's like when I was a kid and I hated to go to the dentist, or if you ever had to teach your kids to swim, but the public pool is only 65 degrees or whatever, and you're not comfortable, you're not going to learn. And it's no different to what you're describing, that connection, that belonging, that sense of security and safety is a prerequisite for change. And we just aren't aware of that.
And we aren't aware of it because we've been conditioned to like that ourselves. And so at some point, that cycle needs to be broken. And the people who have the opportunity to break it are those with power and those with access to those needs being met enough in their life. Like that is how it's going to break. It's not going to break because those that have lacked it most of their developmental years in life just somehow just rise up and break the system. It's going to take the people who have maybe benefited in some ways to do that. So absolutely.
Gaelin Elmore, I've been looking forward to this interview all week, and you did not disappoint, my friend. I'm going to leave your contact information within the description of this episode. You are an amazing keynote speaker, public speaker. So for folks interested, particularly in Minnesota, reach out to Gaelin and/or connect with him on LinkedIn as I did, and let's keep on learning together. Gaelin, until we speak again, take care, my friend.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
As we wrap up today's episode, I want to take a moment to reflect on the powerful conversation we had with Gaelin Elmore. His story of overcoming adversity, finding belonging, and ultimately transforming his identity resonates deeply with the core principles of the TIDES Supervision Model. Belonging, resilience, and identity transformation. These are some of the pillars that drive change in the lives of those we serve, and Gaelin's journey exemplifies these concepts in such an authentic and inspiring way. Next week, I will be in Barcelona, returning to the International Training School on Core Correctional Skills to work with old friends and meet a new cohort of students. I am excited about the opportunity to connect with perhaps some of you listeners who may be attending, and I look forward to exchanging insights as we continue to push the boundaries of effective correctional work. As always, if you are interested in learning more about the TIDES Supervision Model and how it can transform your approach to supervision and rehabilitation, visit our website at thetidesllc.com or feel free to reach out via email at thetidesllc@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you and explore ways we can partner in this important work. For those of you looking to learn more about Gaelin Elmore's work, I highly encourage you to visit his website, where you can find information on booking him for speaking engagements or workshops. Whether you are interested in a 2-hour, 4-hour, or 6-hour session, either in person or via virtual webinar, Gaelin's workshops offer incredible insights into building belonging, overcoming adversity, and unlocking human potential. And don't forget to check out his thought-provoking blogs, also available on his website, which dive deeper into the transformational power of belonging and empowerment. I will be sure to leave all the details and links in the show description so you can explore more about his remarkable contributions. Thank you for joining us today. I appreciate you all. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
Like, if they are in survival mode, then the biggest question they are asking right now is whether they are safe. They are not asking, oh, is this like the best decision for my future? They're not asking, like, is this going to lose like privileges for me 3 weeks down the road? No, it's a matter of safety right now. And so those two things are, I really just try to reiterate with people. First, put yourself in their shoes. We've all find ourselves in situations where we might say something to a loved one that we didn't mean. And it's like, well, I want to be forgiven for that after the fact because I didn't mean it. I don't know what I was thinking. But the reality is you just weren't in your logical thinking brain when you made that decision. So how can we apply those similar things? And yes, they are bigger, higher stakes scenarios and situations in which people get incarcerated for. Absolutely. So we're not removing responsibility for decisions and how they impact other people. However, it's the empathy, it's the compassion, it's the belonging that we're extending to people in the midst of the bad decisions that they're making.
The Criminologist podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.